Okay guys, so we're gonna wrap up this series, this Behind Ranger School series, with the last phase, which is Florida phase. So, like I've talked about previously, you start in Georgia. You start at Fort Benning, Georgia for Darby. You move to Dahlonega, Georgia for Mountain Phase, and then you move to Florida. So you go to Eglin Air Force Base, which is on the panhandle of Florida. So I started Ranger School in February. It was really cold. It was really cold at this point. I ended in the middle of July, so I graduated right in the middle of July. So I started the Florida phase, end of June, early July. At this point, there are a lot of heat cats. There are a lot of people going down for heat injuries. The very first thing I will remember about Florida phase is we're driving the buses in, and you already have people that are recycled from the previous class waiting there to receive you, show you around, take your bag, stuff like that. Everyone was wearing dark eye pro, sunglasses, which we never saw like previously up to that point. You didn't see that in Darby phase, you didn't see it in mountains. You were only able to wear the clear eye pro. I felt so cool putting on this dark eye pro in Florida. It was just like, it was game changing. Like I've said previously, every phase is run the same way. So you get there, you kind of in-process that phase, you have a techniques patrolling week where they're showing you exactly what they expect you to do. Then you move into your FTX, and then you go into the cleanup, the peers, all the evaluations at the end, and you move on to the next phase, or in this case, you either move on to graduation, you fail, or you recycle this phase. This is the one phase, the one and only phase in Ranger School I did not recycle. Since each phase kind of has its specialty, so like in mountains, it was mountaineering and rappelling and stuff like that, rope bridges. In Florida, the emphasis is on water movements. So you're working on Zodiac boats, you're building rope bridges, water crossing, stuff like that, because that's the terrain you're working with. So a lot of the movements are through swamps. I'll get to that in a little bit, some swamp stories. But the techniques week is working on specifically raid, movement to contact, and ambush. And then you have your waterborne operations that you're practicing and learning throughout those 5 days of that techniques week. So they're showing you what they expect from you, how to do it, how to execute it, and then you get evaluated. The thing with Florida phase, though, like I've talked about previously, it's a crawl, walk, run. So think of Darby as the crawl, where they show you exactly what they want you to do, and you do it just like that. Mountains, you have a little bit more leadway. Florida, it was like grown-up rules. You have an end state of what you have to accomplish and complete, but there's a lot of variability and flexibility of how you complete that mission or operation. And if it's successful, and you'll most likely get to go. During Techniques Week, you're getting plenty of sleep. You're getting 3 meals a day. You're getting 2 hot meals, and you're getting 1 MRE. So you're getting somewhat rested. You're getting somewhat fed, but they're just preparing you for that 10-day field problem. Now, when I went through Darby and I went through mountains, it was 2 5-day field problems, so you're broken up. You had 1 day of recovery in between. For Florida, it was 10 straight days in the field, a 10-day FTX for you to do your evaluations and complete your patrols and your missions in order for you to get that go for your final outcome, whichever that may be. The things I vividly remember about Florida, for one, just being incredibly hot. Like, I've never been close to being a heat casualty or having a heat injury my entire life. Up until this point. I remember walking one day on a patrol towards the end of the 10-day field problem, and we were very low on water, been walking all day, no sleep, and I could feel myself about to heat cat. This was the closest I've ever gotten. I didn't end up heat catting, but I could just feel like my body on the verge of just collapsing. I've seen plenty of people collapse within those 10 days. In this phase, you receive by far the least amount of sleep. So it kind of like I said, crawl, walk, run. In Darby, you probably get the most. Mountains, you get a little, even though the terrain sucks a lot more because you're walking up down mountains and busting through terrain. Florida, the terrain is fairly flat. However, you're getting the least amount of sleep. So I'd say on average, we got an hour or less every night throughout those 10 days. And you're exhausted just from walking all day. What makes the Florida phase very specific is the swamps themselves. So you're maneuvering through water to get to certain points on your terrain path or your movement to get to your objective. So you might have to cover a few kilometers on the water, dismount the boats, and then get on land and walk a few kilometers. Then at night, sometimes you have to walk through the swamps. So there's 2 swamps you walk through. I vividly remember walking through these places for hours. So the one swamp we started walking in at 10 p.m. We didn't exit the swamp until 7 a.m. the next morning. I've never had chafage so bad in my life in so many places that I didn't know you could chafe in. While the terrain gets a whole lot easier to maneuver, in Florida just because it's flat. At the same time, it's hard to navigate. So like in mountains, you have a lot of terrain features. You have hills, depressions, valleys, ridges that you can identify on the map and then see in person, and then create a route depending on those terrain features that you identify. In Florida, it's all flat, so a lot of it's just azimuth, distance, direction, and then you're just straight shooting towards that. I mean, you have roads you can kind of maneuver along or against, but for most of the part, it's just a straight shot to that objective. Here's how I got my go in Florida. Craziest event, craziest story, very quick, fast pace. So we transitioned leadership late at night, and I had a sprint mission. So essentially a sprint mission is, there's very little planning. It's a frago. You disseminate that frago throughout your chain of command, and then you get to that objective as fast as possible. So it's kind of like a stress shoot. So it's like, I got my mission, but we weren't allowed to step off until it got dark. We had to move 3 kilometers in 30 minutes to hit our objective on time. So I made a decision, and said we were walking through the road or through the woods at first, but because we were walking through the woods, it was taking so much time, we were loud, it was a mess, and I knew we weren't gonna hit our objective on time. Hitting the objective on time is like, if you don't hit it, you're a fail. You don't pass that patrol. So I made the decision to move the whole platoon onto the road, run on that road for 3 kilometers, and we made it in 30 minutes. So me and my platoon sergeant and my squad leaders just running up and down the road with the platoon, trying to motivate them and move them 3 kilometers in 30 minutes as fast as possible. And we were booking it. Everyone's carrying their gear, everyone's exhausted toward the end of the FTX. They knew it was a sprint mission and we had to get there. So as we're coming up on the objective, and it was an ambush that we had to set up, we see our target moving on the road towards us. So it was literally, it ended up being a shit show. Everyone just drops their rucks, gets in the ambush position. We end up ambushing this convoy coming through, and because we ended up accomplishing the mission, it was successful, and when we did what we had to do, and we made our time hacks, I gotta go for that. So, maybe in Darby or mountains, that would have been a no-go just because there's so many more strict guidelines and rules you have to abide by. It's not just success or not success, but in Florida, the sprint missions like that is something you can expect. After the 10-day field problem's over, you walk from your last patrol back to Camp Rudder at Eglin Air Force Base. Our last walk ended up being 16 miles. It was ridiculous. I remember walking through back into Camp Rudder, and as you're walking, they have the Ranger Creed spread out on signs, almost like billboards, the closer you get. So everyone in the platoon is just chanting the Ranger Creed as we're marching back into Camp Rudder. It was awesome looking back on it. Now the most memorable part of Florida Phase of Ranger School is getting fattened up prior to going back to Camp Rogers in Fort Benning, Georgia. So they know if you passed, you're moving on. You're leaving 5 days to leave. If you failed, you're staying, you're recycling that next class. So there's 5 days before leaving Camp Rudder to go back to Camp Rogers. You're cleaning gear, you're getting ready for everything to turn in, you're getting ready for graduation to some extent, and they're putting weight on you like no other. So you get back and you have the 10,000 calorie days. These are 3 or 4 days where they're literally feeding you so much. I'll tell a story here in a little bit. They're feeding you so much, you're gonna piss yourself. That's what happened to me. So you have the opportunity to buy pizzas and burgers and dog X's. The wives of the RIs bring in baked goods, monsters, energy drinks, everything you can think of. They're still feeding you DFAC and they're still feeding you MREs. You're eating so much within this time period, you can't eat anymore. There was one night, and I've told the story before on this channel, there was one night where I consumed so many energy drinks and green teas and stuff like that. We're laying in bed at night and I'm on the top bunk. I'm right here. And I was dreaming that I was still in the patrol phase of Ranger School. I was still in the FTX. And I do the bathroom. So I stand up on my bunk, I take a knee, I face out, still pulling security. And I go to the bathroom from the top bunk down onto the guy in the bunk diagonal to me. I peed on that guy. And unfortunately, he was the only guy that recycled in that part of our bay where we were sleeping. I felt awful. I still feel awful about that. After that, you get shuttled back to Camp Rogers, and you go through all your graduation ceremonies and rehearsals and all that kind of stuff, and you get released back to your family, and you're done with Ranger School. Overall, Ranger School has been one of the best experiences of my life. It taught me a lot about leadership, management. It puts you in situations like sleep and food deprivation and being told and forced to lead under those conditions. which was a great opportunity. You know, anyone that's in the military, I recommend, if you have the opportunity to go to Ranger School, take advantage of it. Go and you will learn a lot from it. I know I have. So that's the series, guys. That's my experience with each phase of Ranger School. Florida probably being my favorite just because I was the first time to go, and it ends with like 4 days of 10,000 calories. So I hope you guys enjoyed it.